On this Tuesday night, another discovery on the site of a former residential school. What are believed to be more than 160 unmarked graves on a BC Gulf island.
There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide.
The stories of survivors and the search for the missing. The tragic consequences of that crane collapse in Kelowna.
Those guys that were there, they had children and wives. They're good people.
The victims, the witnesses, and the investigation. The pandemic's impact on a baby's immunity.
Their microbes have been screwed up.
Advice for parents on what to expect in the months ahead. And pouring salt into a Stanley Cup-sized wound. Why hockey's holy grail is now headed to the home of the Habs.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. Another Indigenous community has revealed it has discovered what it calls undocumented and unmarked graves in an area that was once home to a residential school. Penelakut Island, formerly known as Kuper Island, is near Vancouver Island in BC. The Kuper Island Industrial School operated there between 1890 and 1975, and it's on those grounds that the Penelakut tribe says at least 160 graves have been found. The Catholic Church ran the school until the federal government took it over in 1969. It closed 6 years later. Since the first announcement in Kamloops, BC last month, more than 1,300 suspected unmarked graves have been identified at 4 former residential school sites, 3 in BC and 1 in Saskatchewan. And it is expected there will be many more. Kylie Stanton has our top story tonight on the latest revelation.
For students here, it became known as Alcatraz, an island prison, the path to escape forever in sight. The watery depths, too far across to safely swim.
There's nowhere to run, there's nowhere to hide. It's an island. That's one of the key memories that I recall from attending the school was wanting to run away.
From the 1890s to 1970s, the Kuper Island Industrial School operated on what's now known as Penelakut Island. Now, the Penelakut tribe confirms the discovery of more than 160 undocumented and unmarked graves on the former school site within their territory.
I admit I wasn't terribly surprised. Chief and Council decided it was time to announce that the work they had been doing and the numbers that they've located.
In a letter informing neighboring First Nations communities, Chief Joan Brown writes, "It is impossible to get over the acts of genocide and human rights violations. Healing is an ongoing process, and sometimes it goes well, and sometimes we lose more people because the burden is too great."
I hated it. There was lots of anger and lots of hate, but most of all, it's just like lots of sorrow because I was no longer a kid.
The school was officially closed in 1975. 5 years later, the building was demolished. But the pain remains real for generations of survivors still experiencing trauma.
The whole abuse stayed deep within my heart, my soul. I would not allow it to come out.
Global News has reached out to the Penelakut tribe for further information, but officials have not yet returned calls for comment. It's believed ground-penetrating radar was used in this investigation, and there is still more work to be done, what will likely only add to the number of suspected graves reported to be found right across the country.
To members of the Penelakut tribe, we are here for you. We cannot bring back those who were lost, but we can and we will continue to tell the truth.
But survivors who are well aware of the truth are calling for action and accountability after similar discoveries in British Columbia and Saskatchewan, with searches now underway across the country. This, they say, is just the beginning.
I think Canadians better prepare themselves for more announcements as more of this work starts to ramp up over the next year or two.
Another painful reminder of Canada's past that will almost certainly not be the last. Kylie Stanton, Global News, Victoria.
There is support for those who need it. The Indian Residential School Survivors Crisis Line is available in Canada 24 hours a day. The number is toll-free and you can speak in confidence. It's 1-866-925-4419. Now to another developing story in BC, that deadly crane collapse at a construction site in Kelowna. Police are calling what happened catastrophic, and tonight the city remains under a state of emergency as crews try to stabilize the mangled wreckage. 4 men who worked at the site were killed and a 5th man is missing and presumed dead. Police say he was working in a nearby office and is buried under the rubble. Robin Gill reports from Kelowna.
Tons of steel that were part of the Kelowna skyline for months just seemed to buckle. The broken pieces of the crane tumbled to the ground, taking the lives of 4 construction workers. Shay Cosgrove worked with the men and is gutted by the loss of his work family.
Those guys that were there, they had children and wives. And they're good people.
One worker was seen dangling from stories up, but managed to shimmy to safety. Eric Trudell, the site safety officer, says his colleague was determined to survive.
I talked to him when he was on the cross beam. I was on the 6th floor, and I just told him to keep going and try to get to the building.
The high-rise is a project by Mission Group, a well-known development company in Kelowna. The company had hired Stemmers Construction for the crane. The crane was in the process of being dismantled when it came crashing down. 2 brothers, Eric and Patrick Stemmer, the crane operator, were killed, along with Jared Zook of Edmonton.
Why exactly that crane collapsed, that's a part of the investigation. I simply don't know the answer, and I certainly couldn't speculate. Obviously, something catastrophic occurred.
This is one of Canada's worst crane disasters in a city making an economic rebound.
This is an epic engineering failure. This is crazy.
Paul Nesbitt was working in a nearby office when the crane came down.
All of a sudden, the whole building started rumbling. So you could actually feel the crane coming apart. And then all of a sudden, it was this massive bang.
It's shaken Kelowna and the local construction industry.
People that take this apart are usually quite safe, and they have all the safety mechanisms in place, but I'm not too sure what happened, but obviously something.
But it did happen to men who thought it was just a normal day on the job. And it was supposed to be a regular day for a 5th person who was killed in an adjacent building that was hit by the crane. And tonight, crews and equipment that specialize in these kinds of disasters have been brought in to stabilize the situation so that his body can be recovered, Donna.
All right, Robin Gill in Kelowna, thanks. Now to COVID-19, Canada has surpassed another vaccination milestone. More than 50% of Canadians aged 12 and up are now fully vaccinated, and about 79% have received at least 1 dose. A college in Ontario says it's decided to make vaccines mandatory for those who go to school in September. Toronto's Seneca College says the rule will apply to any students or staff who want to participate in on-campus activities. The college says it's not forcing anyone to get vaccinated, but students who choose not to will have to learn online.
It just seemed, honestly, like the right thing to do and the logical thing to do. It keeps our community safe.
Whether COVID vaccinations should be mandatory is a hot topic. This week, both France and Greece announced new measures to provide vaccinated people with privileged access to activities such as eating indoors and going to shopping malls and cinemas. They're also making immunization mandatory for healthcare workers. Abigail Bimman looks at the arguments for and against and where Canadian provinces stand in the debate.
Un peu contre mon gré.
This physical therapist says she'll be vaccinated against her will to keep her job. Mixed reaction in France to the president's announcement all healthcare workers need the jab.
When it comes to high-risk patient groups, especially when you think about long-term care, when you think about our oncology and immunosuppressed populations, I think it's possible the benefit outweighs the downside.
In Canada, COVID case numbers are lower and vaccination rates higher, but the push is still on.
We expect every care worker to be vaccinated. And if it's not the case, there will be consequences for that.
Only a few provinces have mandated vaccines, and only sort of. Quebec has the broadest rules. Since April, healthcare workers who interact with patients have had to show proof of vaccination or be subject to testing 3 times a week. Ontario and BC target long-term care staff. In Ontario, they must show proof of vaccination, provide a medical reason as to why they can't, or take part in an educational program about the benefits. In BC, new rules take effect next week, requiring unvaccinated workers to wear a mask and take regular rapid tests.
We're going to continue to use the education model. There is choice when it comes to who gets vaccinated.
We are going to continue to do what is necessary by giving Canadians the information, by making it easy to get vaccinated.
The head of the Registered Nurses Association of Ontario says she would likely support a government move to make vaccinations mandatory for her members, acknowledging there are still some vaccine hesitant or even anti-vaxxer nurses.
We are talking about a insidious, mutating virus.
So these folks who are concerned about mandatory vaccines have nothing to be concerned about, and there will be no vaccine passports.
Vaccine passports, the other hot topic advancing globally, while Canada doesn't yet have a clear national plan. Provincially, Alberta is most opposed. Ontario hasn't yet planned for one, while Quebec is moving ahead with a regional-based system requiring proof of vaccination only for non-essential activities in specific places during outbreaks only. Abigail Bimman, Global News, Ottawa.
One side effect of all the public health restrictions is a big reduction in the usual seasonal illnesses like cold and flu and childhood viruses. That also means young children haven't been exposed to the germs that help build immunity. Now, as people begin to gather again, parents are being told to prepare for things to change. Jamie Morocker explains.
Like so many other pandemic mothers, Victoria Reed has spent much of maternity leave in social isolation.
My plans for, mom groups and doing baby yoga and all of that stuff sort of fell by the wayside a little bit.
For little Holly, it's meant less interaction with new friends and less exposure to germs. Only that's not necessarily a good thing.
These kids are being immune deprived and their microbes are being screwed up, so their immune systems are a bit screwed up.
Called immunity debt, it's what doctors explain as a lack of immune stimulation due to a reduction in exposure to viruses.
The countries that have been have applied quite successful measures to stop COVID-19 transmission in the community will be seeing these effects.
Wellington-based epidemiologist Michael Baker says in New Zealand, reopening has led to a resurgence in a serious respiratory illness known as RSV. And the surge, he says, is putting a strain on local pediatric wards.
There were 1,000 cases a week ago, and that's almost the number we might have for a whole winter.
A recent study found countries like New Zealand aren't alone. Australia is also facing a rise in RSV cases as lockdown measures lift, and experts say Canada isn't immune either.
I think we're going to see a big spike in that in kids in the next year or so.
Back in Calgary, where Stampede is in full swing, Reed says she plans to steer clear of crowds, wash her hands, and socialize Holly slowly.
I do think it's also important to try to ease back into life so her immune system can be built up.
Ultimately, experts say parents shouldn't worry. Babies born during the pandemic have a less than immune system. Kids don't need to catch a severe illness to create robust immunity. Vaccinations and simple hygiene are still the best course of action. Donna?
All right, Jamie Morocker, thanks. Nova Scotia has become the second province after BC to sign a deal with the federal government to fund childcare. The plan is to lower the average cost of childcare to $10 a day by 2026 for children under the age of 6. And Prime Minister Justin Trudeau claims by the end of next year, average childcare fees will be cut in half.
For families here with young kids, this will make a huge difference. Within 2 years, we're going to create 4,000 new spaces and 9,500 more over the next 5 years.
The federal funding was revealed in the last federal budget and is also meant to help with before and after school care. Today's announcement was made as speculation grows an election may be called soon in Nova Scotia. And speculation is also swirling about a possible federal election soon. Climate change should be on the agenda. Hot spells on the prairies are common, but sustained high temperatures and lack of rain right now is happening earlier, and blistering heat is hurting farmers. In Manitoba, the municipality of Armstrong is in day 4 of an agricultural disaster. A severe drought has led to a major shortage of feed, and now grasshoppers are decimating what's left of the crops and vegetation. The municipality is asking for provincial and federal help for farmers. Last week, the neighboring rural municipality of St. Laurent declared an agricultural disaster, too. Wildfires are also a problem in Manitoba. At least 87 are burning now, with danger levels rated high to extreme. New fire and travel restrictions come into effect in parts of the province tomorrow, including a ban on campfires and backcountry travel. And in BC, there are more than 300 wildfires burning. The largest has flared back up, forcing evacuations north of Kamloops. The Sparks Lake wildfire has now burned more than 40,000 hectares. About half the province is also dealing with poor air quality caused by the smoke. BC has already passed 1,000 fires this season. In an average year, there are 1,300. The worst violence to hit South Africa in decades. Coming up, the outrage over a former president's imprisonment. Plus, what's up with these huge goldfish? Widespread unrest and rioting is continuing in South Africa. The country's president says it's the worst violence since the end of apartheid 27 years ago. Police say more than 70 people are dead. 10 of them were crushed in a stampede as looters ransacked a mall. More than 1,200 people have been arrested, and food and fuel are now in short supply in areas hit hard by the protests. The country's currency has taken a dive. This all started after South Africa's former president, Jacob Zuma, turned himself into authorities last week and was jailed for contempt of court on corruption-related charges. Though it's believed the protests are continuing because of anger about poverty and social and economic restrictions related to COVID-19. Anti-government activist groups say more than 100 Cubans have been arrested or are unaccounted for after mass protests there that began on Sunday. Cuba's communist government has been cracking down on dissent. Protesters have been marching through the streets of Havana demanding an end to extreme poverty. They're angry about shortages of food and medicine and general economic hardship made worse by the pandemic and U.S. sanctions. The crisis in Cuba has led to smaller demonstrations in the U.S. as Americans call on the Biden administration to intervene and drop historic trade sanctions against Cuba. The clock is ticking. Will Canada help the Afghan interpreters who worked with Canadian troops? After weeks of pressure by retired Canadian soldiers, the federal government says it is now working to bring Afghan interpreters to Canada. Time is running out. Much of Afghanistan has already fallen back into the control of the Taliban, and those who Canadian soldiers trusted with their lives need help. Mike Armstrong explains.
More and more of Afghanistan in recent weeks has fallen under Taliban control. Government forces still hold some urban centers, but they've lost most of the country. In terms of territory, the Taliban claims to control about 85%.
The reports are getting worse and worse and worse.
Retired Canadian soldier Dave Morrow says the clock is ticking. He's part of a group that's been working to pressure the federal government to help the Afghan interpreters he and other Canadian soldiers worked alongside. Men, he says, who will be killed if the Taliban reaches them.
They have no other option except us to save them and the lives of their kids.
Just about everywhere Canadian troops went in Afghanistan, they went with locals who knew the territory and spoke the languages. Canada had a program to resettle interpreters and their families, but it expired in 2011. Retired soldiers have been pushing to have that program reopened. Well, Monday, the defense minister confirmed that's now happening.
We right now are working at former employees of the Canadian Armed Forces, the Afghans who worked with us, and also currently who are working with global affairs within our embassy.
It seems like we got some traction.
Morrow says the announcement is good news, but that there's a good deal of work ahead. When the U.S. announced earlier this year it would be pulling out of Afghanistan by September 11th, it started fast-tracking its resettlement program. It's also planning airlifts. Canada appears to still be planning its plan.
Until we actually see something, an action on the ground, for now it's still just words.
They want to kill us. Interpreters themselves have had their own campaign in Afghanistan. They say they faced threats for years, but with the U.S. now pulling out and Taliban control spreading, hiding from them is getting harder and harder. Mike Armstrong, Global News, Montreal.
The Stanley Cup heads to Montreal after all. We'll explain why next. This is what can happen when you release your pet goldfish into a lake. These football-sized goldfish were caught in Minnesota. They've been uprooting plants, which causes poor water quality and disrupts the ecosystem. So many have been found recently. One city issued a plea to the public not to dump unwanted fish, saying they really do grow bigger than you think. The Stanley Cup could hold a few goldfish, and who knows, maybe it has at some point. The cup certainly gets around. Whoever wins it gets to celebrate with it, and in the heat of the moment, things can happen. And in Tampa Bay, something happened. Mike Drolet explains.
The NHL should have seen the omens. When you combine a jet ski, these oddly hypnotic dance moves, and the unfettered abandon of Tampa's Russian players, the Stanley Cup never really had a chance. It hasn't been revealed what happened, but that's a fairly sizable dent. An irony of ironies, Montreal may not have won the Cup, but it's where the NHL's official engraver lives, so that's where it's going for repairs. For most of the year, the Cup is handled with extreme care, so much so that even fingerprints don't stand a chance. Yet Cup tradition allows every winning player to get a full day with Stanley. And oh, the things it's seen, from Kandahar to mountaintops, countless pool parties and babies, and Alex Ovechkin's bed. The stories add to its lore. But is this one dent too many?
It should be like dropping a casket or something, you know, like people should be down on their knees praying for forgiveness from the hockey gods that we damaged the Cup.
Fortunately, the damage is repairable, and the Cup will return to Tampa in time for the rest of Tampa Bay's hometown dates.
Just madness on the Hillsborough River.
Hey Stanley, good luck with that. Mike Drolet, Global News, Toronto.
And that's Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's Your Canada is the Davis Bay Pier on BC's Sunshine Coast. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you here again tomorrow. Take care of yourselves. Bye-bye.